let's discuss just everything that we know about time. It's about time, don't you think? Well, you know, at some point, somebody had to sit down and say, let's divide a day up into certain increments here, by the way. A day, 1 day is what? Why does our time, really we form everything around, well, days and years, so I suppose we should write that. What is a day, if you will, Sandy Bollinger?
24 hours.
I know, but why? We did split 24 hours make up 1 day. But the question is, where does a day come from? What happens in that amount of time that makes us call it a day? Ryan?
Earth spins on its axis.
Yes, and we call that the Earth. The Earth makes what? 1 revolution? Or 1 rotation?
Rotation is day, revolution is year.
So Earth rotates 1 time in a day. Which means the Earth realistically is spinning awfully fast, because if the circumference of the Earth, children, here's our Earth. I'll give you a little three-dimensional look. And it's spinning, 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 kind of actually spinning that way around the whatever. Oops, spinning that way. The distance around the Earth is about what? Does anybody know? Something like, I don't know. Let's just pretend that I know. I think it's close to 24,000 miles. I think. Okay. And if it goes around 1 time in 24 hours, that means the Earth is really spinning, even though we can't tell. I guess because we're used to it, at about 1,000 miles per hour, which is a relatively fast speed there. You know, we don't feel like it. Really, we should be, every time we go around, it's like spinning something. We should be shooting off into outer space, but we have what that holds us on here. So anyways, that's 1 day. It's the time the Earth rotates 1 time, and that's why, you know, we usually get a morning and a night and a day, because we're facing the sun half the time. Now 1 year, which happens to be how many days?
Like 365.
I believe it's 365 and 1/4.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why every 4 years we have to add an extra day in there, because if we did not do leap year, which we should, let's just take this 1/4 out, because we also have to say 1 leap year. We should be coming close to 1. Do we just have 1?
Yeah.
366 days. If they did not add that 1 leap year in there, what would eventually happen, given enough time, and it would take a while, is that the seasons would no longer follow. I mean, winter for us would end up being spring, and spring would end up being summer, and eventually things like that would get all mixed up, because we would start to change. Seasons would be off by one day every 4 years, you know. So after 40 years, you'd be off by 10 days. And after 80 years, you'd be off by 20 days. After 80 years, you know, you'd start feeling more like one or the other. I'm not sure what would happen. If we add a day, if it would go backwards or forwards. But, you know, because we're off just a little bit on that, we have to add that extra day in. Now, 1 hour, we separate into 60 minutes. And 1 minute. We break down into even smaller things, and that's 60 seconds. And if you want to go smaller than that, I guess we have to go tenths or hundredths or thousandths of seconds, or this seconds, and whatever seconds. Now, in addition to that, talking about years, when you put 10 years together, that is 1 what? Noah? 10 years is what we call 10 years put together is a decade. We put 100 years together. That is 1 century. It's always easy to remember that, because if you think of a cent, being 100 pennies in a dollar. 1,000 years is
Oh man, we just.
Landon?
Millennium.
1 millennium. And that's a little confusing because people see the word mill and they think million, but no. A millennium is 1,000 years. And you weren't alive, but I was. You know, back not very long ago, we went through not only a decade, a century, but we also went through a millennium back in the year 2000. And if you remember, well, you don't remember because you guys were born in what, 2000 what? When the year 2000 came around, everybody was very afraid. Does you know why? Anybody hear the stories about that? They called it Y2K because it stood for year 2000. K is our little abbreviation. But everybody, it was probably the biggest scare we've had since I've been alive. Why was everybody scared of the year Y2K? That's good to know. It's a little American history here. Maggie? No, it didn't have anything to do with anything natural happening. It had nothing to do with nature. It had nothing to do with the Inca Indians calendar ending or whatever stuff that happens every once in a while. This was even bigger still. Anybody? I guarantee you ask your parents and say, hey, tell me about Y2K. Why is everybody all upset? Why everybody was waiting right at New Year's Eve like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Brooke? Not necessarily. I will tell you, but Caitlin's got it.
Something about like computers.
That's exactly it. See, they started building computers in the 1960s and the 70s. And when they built computers, they put clocks inside of them. And they figured that these people who built the computers that sent like, you know, there's computers on everything, especially out in space, on satellites, and every business, every company, whatever, is based on computers. I mean, computers generate, electric company has computers, tell where electric goes and all that sort of stuff. And the people were afraid that because these people built them in the 1960s and the 1970s, they never thought about the clock in a computer putting the year, anything after the year 2000 in it because the digits were always 19, whatever, 1961, 1962. And a lot of people figured that because these computers did not have clocks in them that would register anything past 1999, that once it got to the year 2000, all these computers were going to like just kind of freeze up because they didn't have the actual, because everything is based on dates. I mean, computers keep time and record of all sorts of stuff there. So, and that was it. Everybody, they told people to make sure they had, you know, a month's worth of food in their basement because their power was probably going to go off. They weren't going to be able to get any television. You know, the cable was going to go down. You know, all these things were supposed to happen because these computers weren't ready and they couldn't go up into space and change all the chips and do all that sort of stuff. So, and guess what happened in the year 2000? Nothing. It was a huge, big setup for. We had people coming out here to talk to our church about how to get prepared for it, just in case it happened. And, you know, people were taking money out of the bank because banks would close down because whatever, you know, or something like that. So that's the whole story on Y2K. Ask your parents about it; they'll tell you. Yeah, it was all a big sham. What else do we need to know here?
For Spanish.
Oh yes. So we get to take them to Spanish?
Sure, if you'd like.
Okay, perfect. Oh yeah, and then with clocks, I guess we have to talk about this. Draw yourself a nice little clock there. Well, just put it on the time. Can't have too many. Because we have 24-hour days, but our clocks are really only 12-hour clocks, we have what's called AM. And I always forget if you're supposed to put periods between them or not. You guys cover that in English. Let's see what they do in the math book. In the math book, they put them as little letters with periods between them. And I don't know, one stands for anti-something, or one stands for post, or something like that. But probably the toughest part is 12. Knowing the difference between 12 o'clock midnight, and 12 o'clock noon. Which one is AM and which one is PM? Do you know? Which one is AM and which one is PM? Because they both fall right exactly when AM's changed to PM. Morning is always AM. And afternoon is PM. So, but when you have 12 o'clock midnight, do we call that at 12 o'clock AM or is 12 o'clock AM the one that's the noon part there? Who sends the email? Madison, what do you say? Midnight is PM or AM? Midnight is in fact AM. And then 12 o'clock noon is PM. Now, because in the military, they don't want to get all confused about whether, and you know, they do stuff 24 hours a day, and if you say 1 o'clock, they don't know if you mean 1 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock at night. The military uses a different time system. They use a 24-hour system where it goes all the way kind of like this. It's 0, 100 hours, they call it, and then 1, 100 hours, 2, 100. And they go all the way to, you've got 1,200 hours, and then you have 1,300 hours and 1,400 hours. And you can set your watches or whatever to this, to military time or whatever. And basically the gist is this. This is midnight. And all the ones, all of these, this is 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. 1,200 hours is noon. And then you just have to subtract 12 from all these to figure out what the afternoon time would be. In other words, this is the same as 1 o'clock PM. 1,400 hours is 2 o'clock PM. And they did that simply because, you know, when you're giving orders and military people have to be right on time and not get confused with whatever. When you say it's 1,500 hours, okay, there's no question what time that is. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But if you told somebody, okay, be there at 3 o'clock, in the military, they don't know if that means 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 at night, so they use the 24-hour sort of thing. So if you ever see that on your clock and you see something that, you know, is 1836, what real time would we call that? Or take 12 away from this, it's 6:36. 6:36 in the afternoon. So when you see a clock that shows that, that's what that is there. And now let's look at a couple more problems here. Write down this problem, because they ask us some problems about time. Bill went to attended a movie that was 2 hours and 5 minutes long. Bill went to a movie that was 2 hours, 5 minutes long. And ended at 9:20 p.m. Ended at 9:20 p.m. What time did the movie begin? What time did the movie begin? So if it ended at 9:20 and it was 2 hours, 5 minutes long, how do you suppose, how are you going to do that problem there? I don't want the answer. How did you do it, Ryan?
I subtracted 2 hours and 5 minutes from
9:20 minus 2 hours and 5 minutes. In which case you ended up with
7 hours and 15 minutes.
7 hours. Well, it started at 7:15. That was actually the time it happened. But the one thing you have to be careful with, though, is this. What if the movie was 2 hours, 25 minutes long? If you're doing that subtraction problem, anybody know what you have to be careful with here? If I'm subtracting that, okay, I can't take 25 minutes away from 20 minutes. So just like in normal subtraction, what do I have to do? You have to borrow. But the problem with time is not in tens. Okay, it's not like money where there's 10 cents or 10 penny or 10 dimes make up a dollar. It's not, 10 pennies. Time is in, and here's the deal, you have to borrow from this 9, which is hours, right? It becomes an 8. Same principle, but you have to think, an hour is worth how many minutes? 60 minutes. So if you take an hour away from here, you don't just add 10 over here, because an hour is more than 10 minutes. You have to actually add 60 to this, and it becomes an 80, because an hour is 60 minutes. So now when you do your subtracting, now you can do subtract like whatever normal. You end up with 7 from 2, 655. So when you're working with time, you always have to keep that in mind. When you borrow in time, you have to borrow how many minutes an hour is, not just 10. Okay. Same thing when you're working with measurements. If you're measuring, do you ever do inches and feet and all that stuff there? When you borrow from feet and go to inches, you can't just put 10 up there because there's not 10 inches in a foot. I don't know if that really makes sense. Okay, that's enough of that because you're all looking at me like I'm silly.